I would like to welcome everyone to the Roxborough Roundtables. My name is Jessica Putman, and I am the student coordinator of the tables. Today's topic is professional communication at work, and our host today is Tracy DePedro.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Well, I'm going to get started today. Thanks for having us by kind of introducing and letting my co-moderator introduce herself, and then we'll introduce the panel.
Hi, my name is Ainsley Maloney. I'm the Assistant Director of Industry Relations at Philadelphia University.
My name is Todd Kramer. I'm Assistant Professor in Industrial Design and President of Blue Kiwi Designs.
My name is Dylan Eppenstein. I'm the Director of Residence Education for the Office of Residence Life at Philadelphia University.
My name is Amanda Medina, and I am a Senior Professional Communications major, and I'm currently an intern at Philadelphia Magazine.
And I'm Laura Bickert-Sorello. I'm the Associate Director for Internships in the Career Services Center.
Thank you. Well, I'm the Director for the Career Services Center, and just to give some framework before we kind of get into the discussion, we decided to do one of the roundtables, and we're trying to come up with various topics, and this was a particular one of interest to us in thinking about professional communications and considering the generational and cultural differences and the vast array of social media tools and technology used. How to communicate now, kind of the lines have become a little blurred and certainly gray for students and seasoned professionals of how to kind of handle these situations when they come up in the workplace. Interesting kind of a few statistics, but our National Association of Colleges and Employers has ranked, in their surveys, verbal and written communication as kind of the top skills that employers look for. For students and when hiring candidates. So certainly a very relevant topic, we feel, to be discussing and more important than ever to be educating students and young professionals on how to handle these scenarios that we all encounter. So we're going to start by, I think Laura will start by sharing just some of the biggest lessons you've learned in professional communication, and particularly how it's evolved in recent years given social media and the various outlets we've had.
Sure. I think actually the biggest lesson that I've learned really is that I need to continue to educate myself in the new mediums of communication. So, and kind of seeking out appropriate people who are more expert level knowledge in different mediums than I am, so I'm able to use them effectively and understand how other people who I'm communicating with are using different means. And I often, when we were preparing for this panel, we were discussing kind of when we first started working and kind of going forward. My first professional role in supervising student staff on a campus, I absolutely said, no, you do not text me, ever. And now I would think very differently about how, about communicating via text with my student staff. And so knowing that I'm going to be working for another 30 or 40 years in the future, being mindful of how those things are changing and making sure I'm staying relevant, I think will be most important.
Absolutely.
So, this is Dylan. Some experience that I've had with kind of best practices and things that I didn't really expect going into the workforce was that regardless of what's new and modern, that old traditions die hard. Because depending on the work environment you're in, there's still the expectation that if someone's older than you, you call them Mr. or Miss or Mrs. whatever. So thinking about what is the expectation of your office, of the job you're in, how you communicate with superiors, it's different everywhere you go. So not forgetting that really whenever you go into the job environment, you need to really figure out what is the expectation of that environment before you really jump in as a young employee.
I'll add to that. This is Todd. I would say one of the biggest things I've noticed over time is you're always presenting. You're always on, whether it's professionally or even just with your peers and your colleagues hanging out on the side. It's never been easier for someone to put a mirror back to you, whether it's something that you said verbally or something that you wrote in an email or a tweet or just a everyday general conversation, and being able to uphold that professionalism. It's becoming more and more difficult to do on a daily basis.
Can you give us a student perspective?
Yeah, sure. This is Amanda. I think that because I was brought up in the age of social media, it was almost backwards for me. I knew how to use all those mediums, but not in a professional manner. So having professional jobs and internships has allowed me to really understand, yes, we know how to use social media, but at the same time, we need to know how to communicate professionally with it. So I think that's one of the things to, always consider. You might know the mediums, but you might not necessarily know how to use them to communicate in a professional manner.
Did you, kind of piggybacking off of Dylan, did you feel in some of your recent experiences that the expectations were set for you at the outset, or was that clear or easy for you to understand?
As far as social media goes?
Or just kind of culture, is it more formal or casual, or could you text your supervisor, or could you call them by their first names, things like that? Mm-hmm.
I think it honestly depends on the culture of the company that you're at. Every single company and person is different, and you kind of have to observe and get a feel of, what is acceptable in the office. And, maybe something isn't acceptable in office overall, but an individual person might allow you to text them. Maybe a supervisor will be like, hey, if an emergency does come up, just shoot us a text message, and, just so we can get in contact with you and know what's going on.
So one of my questions was, what are some common mistakes you've noticed that people make in the workplace around professional communication, or that you've made?
Okay, I have one. This is Todd. So when I first started off working professionally for a corporation, I wasn't necessarily aware of the carbon copy or the blind carbon copy aspect, and I kind of did a inadvertent reply to, but I didn't know who else was on the chain, and kind of doing that due diligence up front and making sure that if you don't put something out there that you can't take back. And yeah, that was key. Something I still do today. That was a bad one.
I can relate to, in terms of email, I always, and still to this day, I'm more cautious about tone. That was a big one, I think, for me, and I know students struggle, even when we're working with students, and, what do you put in an email, and not knowing what the tone of an email might, or even written anything, you can infer that on the other end of who's receiving that, so that was something that I always still think through before I'm going to send this, or before I put something in writing, who's the receiver and how might they receive it or interpret that message, for sure.
Yeah. I think similarly, figuring out, should I be emailing somebody versus should I be picking up the phone and calling them, partly thinking about, well, how quickly does this issue or concern need to get resolved, or just will this be better received if I call somebody and ask their opinion about it, or like kind of brainstorm and go back and forth a little bit in the conversation versus a one-sided email. I think considering that, and this was Laura.
This is Dylan. So I've had two different experiences at two different work environments around the appropriateness of when to send an email or not. So I previously, before working in higher education, I worked in the chemical engineering field, and I sent an email to a supervisor that had this work action needed to take done in 2 to 3 days. So I expected easily in 2 to 3 days after sending this email, he would have gotten it, been able to follow through. Well, unbeknownst to me, my supervisor had an average of 400 emails in his inbox and did not regularly check them because that wasn't his form of communication. In order to get something done, his rule was he had to tell me 3 times. So I would have had to walk into his office multiple times and remind him or have the conversation with him about that item and give him a hard deadline because the email would have counted. So 3 days later, when the item needed to be completed, it wasn't complete. So I learned that quickly about that environment was something that, even though we had been communicating in both manners, that for any important item, it didn't have to be in writing. It shouldn't have been in writing. It should have been done in person. Whereas in other times, I've met with people where you go and you put it in writing, and they're just like, "Why did you put that in writing? Now we're liable for it." So it's understanding kind of the context of what you're communicating, what the expectations are, So it is difficult to navigate regardless. And oftentimes having a good supervisor or peer that you can kind of bounce ideas off of when you're entering the workforce is helpful. But sometimes you just have to figure it out.
I just want to add, Evan Lane, as a professor, I get a lot of email, and I send out a lot of email. And you get so many different impressions on people. And tone is so important. Err on being over polite. Just think polite. Don't be dismissive. Never use caps, ever. It's a big mistake. I find also that, at least personally, I know a lot of other people, when I send out emails and I don't get a response within a reasonable period of time, I look at that as an act of disrespect. And I will think badly of the person who didn't respond. If you're busy, the best thing to do is just say, got your email, get back to you in 5 days. And that's fine, because then I'll say, okay, I know they're busy, but they didn't disrespect me in that way. And I think that's an excellent way of doing things. If people do something for you, like you ask them to do it, thanks. You just put THX, but it just shows that, again, you're being polite. You're acknowledging they did it. And it's amazing what you can get out of people with a simple thank you after an email. So these are easy things to do, but err on being over polite and always think someone's going to say something the wrong way. And I think I agree with you on that, Tracy. Be careful.
Now, a quick counter to that. I had a supervisor who said, if you ever send me a thank you email, I'm going to fire you. Because they got thousands of emails a day, and an extra simple thanks or okay email was something that was not what they wanted because it clogged up their box. So it just depends on who you're working with and how that communication happens.
And when does the thank you stop? Because sometimes I feel like, thanks, no problem, okay, bye.
Leave me alone.
Because we just keep going.
Well, that kind of speaks to one of our questions on here too, was when is the appropriate response time? And even now with social media, if someone sends you a message now through Facebook or LinkedIn or, tags you in something, when and how long, or is it offensive if you don't like something or respond or acknowledge, or what do you guys think about that?
This is Amanda. I think I personally always like to respond as soon as possible, and if I can't necessarily give an answer right away, I'll just shoot them an email and say, hey, let me look into this and I'll get back to you, just so they know that you've read the email or message, whatever it might be, and they are not left, thinking, oh, did they even receive it? And then they might go through the trouble of trying to call you or maybe even text you, and you might not want that. So I think definitely just making the effort to give a simple reply back in the meantime, I think it's always really important.
This is Laura. I would echo what Amanda said. My personal philosophy in responding is making sure that you're doing it within 24 to 48 hours so that somebody has some sort of a response from you. But I do think it's hard, especially as a new professional going out to work and figuring out what is that expectation if your supervisor doesn't set that for you, especially if you're interfacing with outside clients and things like that. I did, have an experience at my previous university. Our supervisor, during busy times of the year, had us all set out of office messages that said, due to the high volume of contact, at this time, we will, you'll get a response within 48 hours. Please be patient, or something like that. And I felt like that was a helpful practice to have somebody share with me and be able to implement that kind of going forward with other supervisees or team members.
In regards, this is Todd. In regards to professional response as far as time, I kind of got a little different. Coming from the corporate world, 2 to 3 hours, and that's only because when you look at when people come into work, when they start actually doing work, when they go off on lunch and they take the break, and then they get back into the mode of actually doing work. And then when they start to mentally check out, because it's starting to be about that time to go home, and when the end of business needs to wrap up that day, there is no time. You get it in, process it, do yourself a favor and get it out. And at least that's the world that I've been in for the last 15 years. And everyone else seems to appreciate it because they can move on with their work, and whoever they need to send that to, they can move on with their work, and it's a chain. So It's a little intense, but everyone else will like it better.
So this is Dylan. One thing that I've realized is not just how quickly you respond, but also the time that you respond. So I work in residence life, and we have a 24 on-call schedule, so oftentimes I'm up at strange hours due to incidents, a variety of other things, or I've been dealing with a student behavioral concern or something that has taken me out of meetings all day. So the only time that I can respond to emails in a timely manner is after hours. But I've learned that when communicating with students at strange hours, anywhere between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., if I'm up, watching Netflix and responding to emails, that oftentimes students will take that as I'm responsive to them any time of the day. So their expectations change. So I've I've changed my practice that unless I'm communicating with my staff directly via email, to a student, I will preset my emails to go out at 9 a.m. So using Outlook, there's a function you can do with delayed delivery. I delay all of my night emails that I write to go out first thing in the morning, so it never looks like I'm responding to a student during non-traditional office hours.
This is Evan, but the other side of that is when I get emails from people like 11 o'clock at night, some of our administration here, like, wow, she's really working hard. I get that, oh, wow, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Cool, it's very impressive. So maybe you should just keep the email, make it at 5, but don't send it to 11.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's why I said to my colleagues I keep it that way. Right. To students have different expectations. Yeah.
Hi, this is Danielle Gatlow, Associate Director of Career Education and Career Services. With this topic, though, I would like to say that you do set some sort of an expectation, like what you're saying, Dylan. And I think with that comes some responses from students in particular that if you don't respond within 2 hours, they're shooting you off 3 emails of, can you tell me if you've received my inquiry, my email? Can you tell me when you're going to respond? And it's 3 in a row without me having had even the chance to address your initial email. So I also feel like there's this balance of is that really professional to be following up with me numerous times before I've had a chance to respond initially? Is it okay if you've applied to a job to email them 3 or 4 times once you've submitted the resume to see if they've received your resume? Because you're anxious about the response doesn't necessarily mean you're the only priority of the person on the receiving end. So I feel like there's a fine balance of professionalism of how much do you expect and what is your response if they're not meeting your expectations.
Or on top of that, this is Dylan, if you get a text, an email, inter-office IM, and a tweet all out from the same person, it is a different level of urgency. Right. But it also could come off to somebody as you're overstepping your bounds and trying to get in touch with them. If it's really that important, come see them in person versus badgering them through a variety of different communication tools.
Well, actually, so that dovetails really well into our next question, Dylan. This is for you. Given your role as Director of Residence Education, can you tell us some experiences you've had communicating with the student population and how it's changed in recent years?
Absolutely. So, obviously, email provides an opportunity for students to reach out to you during any time of the day, which is really helpful because you get feedback, you can address it sooner than later. Allows students to send you communication when they're not in class. But one thing that it has also created is this kind of lens of appropriateness of communication. So about once a month we get an email sent to us back down through the communication kind of track that a student sent to the president. It's a really basic issue that could have been dealt with by contacting a hall director or contacting the dean, but instead it immediately goes to the top and then creates this trickle-down effect that then you now have this interpretation of the student who went the nuclear option first versus going with the appropriate chain of command. And something that our students should learn is that it's not how it works in the job world. You don't send the CEO an email when you're upset about the coffee and how it tastes. So it's really important to be able to realize this is the appropriate manner and how to communicate, who I communicate to first, and how do I track that communication, so that if I know that I'm not getting a good response from them, then I can take it to the next step versus going the nuclear option and then filtering it down.
Amanda, I'm curious again, in your experience, have you felt that, again, that was clear for you of who to go to first and how to respond to things in your experiences?
Well, I'm actually an RA. That's kind of funny. So I would say that when I was a freshman, I think that was my mindset, go to the top, because that's almost like where you're taught in a way, if you want to get things done, if you want your message to be heard, you have to go to the top, It's almost like if you're having a bad experience with like Comcast, who do you call? You make sure you talk to their manager. And I think that being an RA and, just being able to interact with people on campus and like the offices has allowed me to really understand that that's not how it works, how Dylan said. And you really do have to take into consideration that everyone has a different role. And, the president isn't going to be concerned about bad coffee. You go to the cafeteria, and then they'll be able to take care of it. So I think definitely it's something you learn as you figure out the different roles of different people and, how to appropriately handle it as well.
And I think it's interesting that you said as a freshman you thought to go to the top, and this speaks to generational, because I immediately thought, now as a freshman in my era, I would have never thought to go to the top, and it was like, teachers are in charge and you don't question authority and more of that. So I think even that speaks to the changes over time of what, people might think is okay, to go right to the CEO or the president or your professor and speak your mind, where that might not have been the case, in prior generations.
So this is Dylan. I think there's the anonymity of that electronic communication. So saying the words to somebody is not as easy as typing them or tweeting them or whatever it might be.
Right.
So it's easier to tweet at the president's handle, especially if they're active on social media, or to send them an email than if you were actually take the time to go to the president's office and go through the appropriate sign of setting up a meeting and having a conversation with them. So that's something, one, would be a good experience for a student if they did feel strong enough to go and approach. Every office is always open to meeting with students. That's perfectly fine. Typically in an office, other people are open to meeting with other people. But hiding behind the anonymity of sometimes that electronic communication can create trouble, because it's tagged to you, your name's on it, and then it can now create a perception of you as a student or you as an employee, and could have a negative impact on your time here or your career.
Do you ever find that students are almost surprised when you bring them in to discuss something that they tweeted, for example?
Yes. So Twitter there's an easy way of tracking Twitter. In particular, there are things like Twitter falls and Twitter feeds that you can program to collect hashtags to collect specific words. So you could put in Philadelphia University, Philly U, Res Life, and I could see every single tweet that ever had those type of words in it and filter through. And if a student was saying something derogatory or they were subtweeting at us, if no one knows what subtweeting is, it's when you put someone's handle without the @. So therefore, it's like calling them out, but it doesn't hit their Twitter feed. And we've had situations where students are harassing other students and threatening other students via Twitter, which we have a policy against. You can't electronically harass another individual. And we've seen it happen here and seen kind of the pitfalls of it. And in the real world, I was listening to NPR the other day, and someone got fired from their job at a pizza shop because of subtweeting. So they went online and they just got a job. They went to the interview and they said, "Oh, I start this SH blank blank job on Monday. Can't wait," like weird emojis. And then somehow someone saw that tweet, sent it to the owner of the pizza shop, and they responded via Twitter, "No, you won't. You're fired." So it's not anonymous. It goes out there. It's easy to find through your social network of connections, and it can have an impact on you outside of just putting out your own thoughts.
Sorry, I feel so old.
But you don't know what subtweeting.
I don't do it. Maybe that's how I kind of stay safe in the whole thing. I just do email, I'll text message, and that's it. I'm going to keep the Facebook. I'm done with all that stuff. Wow.
Well, and maybe as a business owner and feeling a little out of the loop on some of this search, can you speak to hiring students or interns or even just professionals, and we talked about cultural even differences in working overseas and such, and things you've seen.
Well, there's an expected onboarding period that a lot of I would say new hires kind of go through, whether they're aware of it or not. Where basically the first year that they're on board, I'm not expecting them to do too much. I'm expecting them to kind of slowly learn over time the culture, how to communicate. I'm not going to say, hey, send this tech pack overseas to China and make it happen. Because there's a formality, there's a way that you structure that. I'm not going to say, hey, send an email out to this person domestically to get some quotes or anything. Because, again, there's a way that our system works. So we'll start internally. Let's just start talking back and forth. And from there, I'll start to kind of see, they'll lay some breadcrumbs automatically for me. And I can kind of backtrack and see, all right, when we start off, we start with hello. Or here's so-and-so. And this is something that crosses borders as well, both domestic and international. Just that formality of saying hello, or in China, it's usually dear, whoever, and then asking, how are they? I hope you are well, or something plain and simple, almost generic like. And just that, you're building a relationship, a rapport, that hopefully over time, it just becomes a nice relationship. Subtleties of that, almost more so than what you're asking for, is more important to me as a business owner. And then on top of that, no one has time to read paragraphs. So you can speak, and that's one area where I evolved a lot, was everything was precious. Here's my story, and here's why I need it, and here's what I need to buy, and you're just like, all right, I got 5 other emails I got to get to in the next 20 minutes. So the idea of bullet pointing what those key points are, you can still speak in fragmented sentences. My thing is, I'm not a wonderful writer. My grammar is horrible, but when I write emails, I'm absolutely brilliant. No, I'm not. People can understand what they need to get from me, and any other additional information that's in it, and they move on with their lives. So it's like how to set up the tone in the relationship, and how to be curt and direct while still being professional at the same time. And then from there, the boundaries and the doors kind of expand. And over time, new hires, they slowly begin to do more.
Hi, my name is Allison Gordon. I'm a graphic design senior at Philadelphia University, and I have a question for Todd. As a business owner and a senior who's about to graduate and I'm going to apply to places, how thoroughly do you look through potential hires' social media before you hire them, or even potential interview for them?
Okay, so I'll stalk you a bit. I will. What I'm hiring is, more so than you as a designer, I'm hiring the character. That goes as far as work ethic. Like I said in the beginning, you're always presenting, you're always on. So I'm looking at your character. I can train a designer, I can train someone who's not a designer to be a designer. Your book is going to show me that in about 2 seconds. I want to know who you are, I want to know what your work ethic is, I want to know what your character is, I want to know, to be honest, I don't need to know who you're hanging out with and what you're doing. That's your time. I want to know that on Monday at 8 o'clock in the morning you're going to be functional and you're going to produce. And as a business owner, at the end of the day, that's all I care about. Well, I care about you because you're coming into the culture and the family of what the company represents, but I'm paying you to produce. And if you can't do that, then you're no good to, and it sounds harsh, but good to me and the company and people around you.
Just to give you a statistic, 93% of recruiters review candidates' social profile before making a hiring decision. So for the students in the room, do you feel like you intuitively know to clean up your social media stuff when you're putting yourself out there?
So my question, so I actually have a question. This is Jessica, by the way. Is it like all social media, or is it like if your page is private, can they still access it?
Good question.
Because that's what I'm always been curious about. Because, like, if your Facebook page is set to private and, like, you don't accept friend requests from random people, it's like, can they still access what your page is showing?
Well, I think it gets tricky because, right, your page might be private and this is Laura, and you and I aren't connected and we don't know each other, but you might be friends with somebody who I'm friends with that you're not aware of. And that person then can just, probably similar to what Dylan was talking about in that pizza shop incident, then that information, can easily get to me. And I think, I would assume, not being a business owner myself, but I would assume aside from doing some of that social media, you might be reaching out to your contacts before you're making some hiring decisions to kind of check in on people and gather some of that information.
It's crazy.
Hi, this is Danielle. So having had experience working at a school that was known for their business school and their strong business students, a lot of the Big Four would recruit with us and our students, and a few of them during a period of time anyways, in the last interview of some of the really competitive positions, they would ask for your login information to all of your social media accounts, and while you're in the interview, they would go into your social media accounts because of the level of character that they need, as well as I have a close relationship with someone that worked for Credit Suisse Bank, a VP, and his thought was he would be involved in that as well, is that whatever you're doing behind the scenes is sooner or later going to affect your public presence and the way that you are representing us on Wall Street and internationally, and this level, this caliber of character that we're looking for. If something's going on behind the scenes, it will creep up, and we can't afford that. So they're not willing to take that risk.
Hi, my name is Kat Goodfellow. I'm a senior graphic design student here at BYU. I have a question about the whole logging in thing. How is that legal?
Because anything on the World Wide Web is public. You don't own anything.
That just seems so immoral.
And creepy.
This is Laura. So I think I've heard similar, this is becoming more and more common that employers will do that. And you as the interviewee don't have to do it. You can opt not to log into your accounts and decide, like you were saying, this feels immoral to you. You can decide this isn't a place maybe that has similar philosophies with me and it's not a good place for me. But then that would be kind of your decision in removing yourself from that process.
Right, like this is Dana. If you're going to work for the Secret Service, they're going to do even more in-depth evaluation of your character. So there are variations based off of the culture and the ethics of whoever you're applying to work for, right? So you have to decide if that's the right fit for you. Certainly if you're approaching work for the Secret Service, you have to think about that from a very young age, all the way through your life. So there are levels, I guess, of that, and you have to decide what would be something that would fit your own morals and ethics and values as well.
Can I ask all the professionals in the room? We have several. What are the things that you should not have? What are the red flags that they're looking for?
Tracy, do you have those?
Well, what I actually was looking today at some stats, and what was interesting is, again, this is some statistics, but 55% of recruiters have reconsidered candidates based on their social profile, with 61% of those reconsiderations being negative. And actually, this topic was, relevant again because the highest negative was really spelling and grammar that kind of came out. One of the things that they were really looking at, because again, I think this, verbal and written communication is so high up on the skills attributes, not only when hiring candidates, but even internally in organizations once people are hired as really the strongest skills that they're looking for.
So you could be on the beach with your husband and wife, perfectly beautiful picture, and if you have misspellings or bad grammar underneath on what a beautiful day it was that you spent with your significant other, that's going to be a negative.
That was considered a negative. Political views were actually neutral, but profanity, alcohol pictures, nudity, guns were considered a negative topic. Your position on guns, and I'm trying to think if there's maybe one other, but I was kind of shocked at the verbal and racial views, diversity and racial issues.
I have a question. It's about the language. because I'm biracial, African American, and I speak Ebonics, so I have slang. And when I post on Facebook, I don't post to be professional because I have no professional people on my Facebook that I communicate with. And either just talking to my friend, typically don't talk the same way I would talk in a workplace, only based on simple fact that that's not how me and my friends communicate. So is that really like a negative towards you? Because how you speak in a workplace is normally different from how you speak with your friends, your family, and things of that nature. Because I have friends who are from different countries, and they speak in their home country's dialect. And it's like, how can that be a negative when it's not like the workplace? Go ahead.
So, this is Danielle. My take on that, from what I understand, is that they're looking at you as a whole package, right? So if they're seeing a common theme that isn't necessarily welcomed in their own culture, then that might negatively sway them, certainly. But if their whole package seems as though you're representing their culture and a good fit for their how they would like to represent the company, then it's probably not going to negatively sway them. So I would think about, though, how are you portraying yourself once you do want to become a professional? Because the idea is, do you want to take that risk, right? So even though, yes, I drink with my friends frequently, socially, and whatever, I try not to have numerous photos of me with a cocktail, because somehow they're getting that impression overall that maybe I have a drinking issue, or that's all I care about, or, oh, hey, maybe that's not welcomed in this particular culture. So thinking that through a little bit might be just worth your while, because are you willing to take that risk? If it's important enough to you, then I would say take that risk. If it's not that important, then you want to polish.
Yeah, I think it goes back to Kat's issue of, kind of, and it really comes down to choices and choice. If there's an employer that you're really interested in, that's at the top of your list, and they happen to be a more conservative culture place, let's say, or formal, then you probably want to think through, what am I putting out there, or what do I need to kind of quote unquote clean up, or to kind of match. And that's really what it all comes down to, is in these employment situations, is kind of are these good matches, But for you, maybe you're going to say to yourself, well, I don't want to be with a company like that, or that's not for me, or who I am, and so you might take that risk, like Danielle said, to kind of leave it.
This is Amanda. So to go off of that, so my suggestion to you, so the same way that employers are looking at your profile, you can look at theirs as well, and kind of figure out, do they show a company culture that I would be interested in? For example, I had an internship with Slice Communications, and they added me on social media. But before I let them add me, I creeped on their page, and I saw, what is acceptable in their workplace. And honestly, it matched, my page a little bit, the things that they like to do for fun, how they communicated. So I tend to do that as well. The same way that employers are looking at you, you can look at them as well. And that goes to show, see if they're a good fit for you.
Hi, this is Allison. I feel like the past couple of topics that we were talking about the social media maybe came off a little negative, but what are some positive words that we could put into our social media that would show that we're what they want, and that we look, that it's setting us apart versus our peers who aren't doing that?
Absolutely.
This is Laura. I think the easiest thing you can do is have a LinkedIn profile. That automatically, when someone is Googling your name and searching for you, does come to the top of that search list. So having a professional presence that's out there is a benefit. And the statistics regarding LinkedIn are 90% of recruiters are on LinkedIn using it actively, and only about 35% of job seekers are on LinkedIn. So that's certainly a way as a student to set yourself apart.
This is Todd. This kind of, since you're in graphic design, this kind of comes back to kind of a branding exercise. Brand yourself. If you had to pick 3 words to describe who you are, how you want to, you want the world to see you, what would they be? And then strive towards that and going forward. Not to say don't have fun or don't hang out with friends and drink or whatever, but how do you want to be perceived? And earlier on, we heard the word perception, and sometimes it's as simple as that. The old cliche, perception is reality. What people see is what they're going to believe. So how would you brand and market yourself, and then drive in that direction?
This is Amanda. I think overall positive language is really good. You know, if you're negative on social media, they're gonna take that into consideration and think, okay, well, maybe this is a negative person. Maybe we don't want them in our work environment. So I think just staying positive and, you know, showing excitement about different things, and maybe even sharing, like, you know, you can show some of your portfolio, you know, kind of just like how Todd was saying, brand yourself in a positive manner.
So it's not just how you display yourself. This is Dylan, by the way. Not just how you display yourself on social media, but how you can articulate how social media could help you and the company. So, for example, if you're coming to a company that is trying to expand their outreach into social media from a design perspective, the ability to articulate your experience with Twitter, with Instagram, with X, Y, and Z would be able to make them feel more confident in your ability to navigate those tools and to help them get to that next level. So but sometimes it's not pushing that too hard. So that's like a different piece. So if you're coming into a company that's a little bit more like slowly evolving into it and then immediately pushing the social media angle can sometimes come off aggressive. So it's important to understand that even though you're entering the world, like Amanda said, extremely articulate in social media and these different like communication tools, that doesn't mean that the job environment and the company that you're going into is. But over time, you can sell the ability to better market that firm, to better connect with consumers, to better bring in research through those avenues, but it might take time. So having those abilities can help you later down the road. But as we've been talking about, it's kind of this double-edged sword, and that's why it's the kind of gray area.
So we wanted to switch gears for just a second and talk about smartphones. Now that smartphones are part of your work environment and even sometimes provided by your company, what are your expectations around staying connected? And do you feel that it's appropriate to use your phone for personal use during work hours?
This is Amanda. So I'll start. As an intern, I think it's so important, and I mean, of course, like as I venture out and apply for new jobs, you definitely need to observe, and you definitely need to ask questions as to like what is appropriate. When I first started at Philadelphia Magazine, I made sure to never be on my phone, stay as professional as possible. But as I interacted with my staff and kind of saw that, it's acceptable to take a phone call, no more than 20 minutes, but yeah, if you have a family emergency or if you just need to make a personal call, you can step outside the office and make it, and they won't punish you for it. And then also just, talking to them and seeing that they pull out their phone at times, it's hard not to be on your phone. It's so distracting. And, knowing that they are humans too and that they get distracted and they're able to pull out their phones, I think knowing when it's appropriate to do it and when it's not is really the most important part. They wouldn't do it at a meeting, but if you're at your desk, you've been working all day, why not pull out your phone for 5 minutes? So it definitely all depends on the culture of your company, what your staff is doing, and then also ultimately like what your boss wants you to do. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it's definitely a balance.
Never, Zevin, never, ever send anything personal on a company email account, because that is not your email. It goes to their server, and you have no expectation of privacy on it. Anything personal, go through Gmail, Yahoo. Do not. And even if it's a phone, don't do. And it's not your phone. Don't do any searches that you would feel uncomfortable your boss looking at what you searched, because it's not your phone, and you don't have an expectation of privacy on it. So they can go right in and look at your history. So
and that brings
real
up
careful.
Searching on the internet, websites, or being on Facebook. Kind of this idea of time theft at work. How much can you be on, Facebook or LinkedIn even, or the inner office kind
Bring
of
your own
chat
phone.
type thing.
Bring your own phone.
And it's interesting, your perspective perspective, Amanda, because I'm in meetings now all the time where everybody does have their phones out, or even their iPads, and they're looking, or they might be emailing or texting during the meeting, which I don't think that was the case, even 5 years ago as much as today, where, and again, is the kind of the organizer of the meeting who's running it thinking like, oh, well, that's kind of rude that people are sitting there, checking their phones all the time, but yet it seems kind of normal now. So I feel that is a hard area to navigate of how much is too much when a lot of it seems accepted and appropriate too.
So this is Dylan. One thing that I try to be really clear about is how I use my phone in those situations. So my phone is my organizer, it's my reminder. So if I'm in a meeting with a group of directors in student life and they say, oh, this is when this event is coming up, I will often take my phone out and verbally say, what is that date again? And then type in my phone so it can be perceived as I am putting a personal notification in my phone about a particular event versus like texting my wife. So it's important that, like, for me, that I'm communicating when I'm using those tools, when it's important. If somebody says, what's happening with this student, and I can then go to my phone and pull up an email and directly communicate so it shows what I'm doing versus just sitting there and kind of like mysteriously texting.
This is Danielle, and I do think that's where it gets blurry, especially even when you're teaching students, or if you're in a meeting, or like if you're part of a search committee or an interview, and one of the interviewers is just on their phone. And I feel like there's like a line where it becomes rude, and you're not sure if they're maybe like taking notes or not. But you want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but then you're not sure. But then it's now deemed inappropriate for you to say, unless it's a cultural thing, like, excuse me, can A, you look up, or B, you put away the phone? Because culturally, especially if it's a very open culture, it becomes very like loose. Where I do think sometimes when you have more clear-cut expectations, it becomes a little easier to understand. Or is it expected that the phone is always on silent, or is it okay to have it just ringing in an office? I think those are big differences, And a lot of times it's okay with a group consensus, but sometimes there are individuals in that group that don't necessarily agree. So I do feel like it gets really fuzzy and very confusing, Where like the last place I worked, like you knew you were never to bring your phone with you to a meeting. Not necessarily I agree with that or not. It was clear. So I do feel like it's helpful to have more clear expectations, because then you do run the risk of like, well, am I appearing rude, or is someone else seeming rude? And I don't even know if that's the case, because they might be taking notes or something. So it's hard to know, or like if I'm doing a presentation and there's students like thumbing around on their phone, it's hard to know, are you taking a note on this, or a photo of the slide, or are you like just tweeting or something,
Right.
Texting. So I don't know, I do feel very confused and conflicted on a lot of situations about that.
This is Todd. I just have a little bit to add to that. Even when you're in the office space or in a meeting, or even in I hate to say classroom, but primarily office meeting environments, sometimes it's appropriate and it's allowed for some people. It's unspoken. It shouldn't be. But you, as the young professional entering your workplace, don't do it. Just don't do it until you've got that street cred. You've been there 9 months, a year and a half. Because it's all right for the president to take out his phone. It's all right for your VP of operations or whatever to take out his phone and check something. You don't question that. You're trying to, the culture, stay in there and grow and learn. Save it until you go back to your office, your cube, wherever, and then take care of it then. So there is a little bit of that gray area gets even grayer at times.
And has anyone in this group ever had specific training in a new workplace around the office culture and the way that they communicate? It sounds like everyone's just kind of sitting, observing, guessing. Has anyone actually had training? No? Sounds like, Amanda, have you? You're saying yes. Okay.
This is Allison. I wouldn't say that I've had training necessarily, but for my second internship when I went in, they gave me like a rundown of how the office kind of like works. Maybe because I was an intern, they gave me that, but I also didn't really think about how employees communicate with each other at different parts of the office, and they had an IM, and like we talked about that and got that up and running. So I feel like maybe a little bit I was talked about, but I wouldn't say it was like formal training.
This is Amanda. I actually did have that experience, and it was actually during the onboarding time. It was about 2 days into the internship, and the first day, the supervisor that was training us, like during a break, she's like, feel free to take out your phone and go on Facebook while I do this. So right away, she almost set the tone of, what's acceptable, but when. So right there and then we knew, okay, well, she's doing something, it's downtime. And we understood that, okay, then it's acceptable to take out the phone. But of course, during the rest of the training, our phones were away, and she was, like, she made sure to put her phone away, so she showed us the way, it's accepted in the office. So I think having those clear, rules and guidelines, and almost like the onboarding of the culture of the office is really important, because if you don't have that, you're almost going to be in this awkward stage where it's like, okay, like, do I pull out my phone? Like, do I leave it in my pocket? And then as far as the meetings go, instead of taking my phone, I always take a notebook and pen. Just to show that I'm being attentive, just to show that I'm there to learn, because that is the ultimate goal of an internship. Of course, when you get a job, it's a little different, but that's just something I like to do personally, to show them that I'm paying attention. My phone is at my desk.
It's a good habit.
Yeah. And you had mentioned that you really had to learn the difference between the way that you use social media in your personal life versus at work. What do you think was the one biggest difference?
I think the biggest difference is just knowing that other people are looking at your profile you might not normally have. Okay. So knowing that, everything that you post, now that the company is following me, is going to be viewable to them, and just being appropriate and like mindful of that. Like, I know before I let them, follow me on social media, I made sure to clean up a couple things. It wasn't necessarily that they were bad, but it was just one of those things where I was like, I don't want them to have this perception of me because of this one memory that I have. So I think just being mindful of the fact that they are looking at your profile, whether you know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Oh. We have a few minutes left to go.
Okay, so this is Dylan. To go back to your original question, I never received a formal training ever about office communication, and have kind of learned it along the way. But from those lessons, I've learned some really important things that even when coming here, I still stuck to. The importance of making a phone call prior to an email, even if it's an email that has a lot of information, is important. I would often call it softening the blow. If I know I'm about to drop a bomb of knowledge or something like that to somebody and say this is going to be a lot of information, I wanted to provide caveats. So when considering about tone, if it's a lot of information abbreviated, that's really important that I can explain to that individual, and it builds that personal relationship and network with those people that I'm communicating with. So it's not like I'm this, email voice that's coming out to people that I have a personal relationship and I can communicate with them, because that's understanding the generational gaps again. Being able to have that one-on-one relationship, send an email, have a conversation before you send the world, and also knowing how people do the carbon copy bombs of accountability. So I never experienced that before coming here, is that oftentimes for people, the way they hold you accountable is by copying the world on an email so that everyone else can see either that you screwed up or that they're going to hold you accountable to this deadline so that you don't need it. 10 people know about it versus just you and that person. So it's also being really conscious that you're not hitting reply all, you're not creating further pieces, but that you see how people, if you view that, then how are you doing that to other people? Yeah. So, when you need to hold people accountable, you can sometimes copy their supervisor if it's, to me, the fourth or fifth time you're asking for something versus doing it the first time every time, because then you're known as that person. Yeah. So knowing what your persona is, it's like I call it carbon copy bomber.
So one thing I want to say, kind of in wrapping up, is I think one thing to take away from this is not to assume anything and to ask lots of questions and kind of try to get those clear expectations. And because it is hard to navigate and very blurry at times and very gray. And, one thing for Philly Youth students in particular, just to kind of plug us, is that we have great resources here to help you guys. So we're here to help, and, you're not here to navigate that alone, So to kind of speak up and ask good questions, and to come to people like, Dylan or myself or Career Services or any office to really kind of ask, before you make those assumptions is really the best thing you can do, because we don't know all the answers. It's not black and white. But to kind of talk that out and talk through it when you're having challenges, I think is probably the biggest key thing, that I always say to students. They even come to me a lot with situations that I think, that's interesting, and maybe there's not, one best way to resolve this, but let's talk through some different scenarios. So I, wanted to just make sure that students know that, they have a lot of good resources here at Philly U and people here to guide them and help along the way.
Thank you very much for a very informative roundtable.